The topic today's video is about is one of those topics that a lot of Witcher fans get confused over. It's something that is touched upon in The Witcher 1, but never really properly explained, at least in the games. This topic is sources, and I've decided to make today's entry about it. Okay, so to begin, what is a source? A source is a person or individual with what is best described as uncontrollable magical potential. Well, it's uncontrollable, at least initially. So they possess the ability to use magic, but they can't control the magic that they have access to. Imagine you have a phone, but it doesn't have a working screen, is indestructible, can't be turned off ever so it has infinite battery life, and automatically answers every call. Then you have another phone that you call this phone with. That indestructible phone will obviously have to answer the call and then transmit the audio. That is basically a source. A source has a connection to magic, but is more of a transmitter of that magic. That's why many sources have prophetic abilities. They don't really control it, it just kind of happens. In fact, I think Triss describes it best in Blood of Elves. Triss discusses Ciri and how despite her clear magical potential, she is unable to perform the simplest of signs, that even someone like Lambert and Geralt can master. This is because Ciri is a source. She could be playing dice one day, picking her nose, thinking about sausages, and then boom, half a town goes up in flames. Triss also said that sources unknowingly get in touch with magical energy, as we already know, but they also convert it. So it's not just raw magic coming out of them. Like any mage, sources also convert the power, except they do it naturally. However, it is also mentioned in the world of The Witcher that sources aren't always apparent until their abilities manifest. And when their magical abilities do manifest, usually in a very destructive way, they can be trained into very powerful sorcerers or sorceresses. So that's basically a source, but there is a lot more to say about them. For example, the confusion surrounding Alvin and Ciri and how they are both sources, etc. And also how mages use sources when they find them. And I'm going to get into all that now. So in Blood of Elves and Time of Contempt, it is mentioned that in the past, sources, and even those just magically gifted, were torn away from their parents by mages, usually by force or deceit, to be trained in the ways of magic to eventually become very powerful mages. It is then later said that mages stopped doing this and adopted a less forceful approach, wherein mages would inform the chapter of wizards about the source and then they would try and get them to join by just fascinating them with magic, as what child wouldn't want to learn how to do all the wondrous things magic has to offer? An interesting point to also note is that a source can be detected early on through careful trials and certain tests, therefore any explosive manifestations can be prepared for. Now to move on to the issue of Alvin, or as he is also known, Jacques de Aldersberg, and Ciri. So, a source is a bit of a loose term. It's basically any individual born with great magical potential that basically hasn't manifested, and even when it manifests, they're simply more in tune and connected to magic than the average user, i.e. more powerful. This is why someone like Ciri is technically classed as a source. She is born with the power of the Elder Blood through being a descendant of Lara Dorren, just like her mother Parvetta. So, as she is born with these strong innate magical abilities, but they aren't accessible initially, she basically is a source. For example, Ciri had the occasional trance that was not self-induced and predicted many events that would later occur. Some may argue that these trances were tied to what the witches were giving her and what Yennefer did at a later date. However, a normal individual still wouldn't be able to have these visions. She was only able to have them due to having the Elder Blood. So, despite the fact that unlike most general sources, we know the source of Ciri's power is the Elder Blood, due to the fact that she is born with this great innate connection to magic, she is still technically classed as a source. Think of a source kind of like a well. It doesn't create water, but provides a great ease of access to water. Now to move on to Alvin, or as he is later known, Jacques de Aldersberg. I do just want to quickly interject and say that technically it is never outright confirmed that these two characters are one and the same, but based on certain evidence it is pretty much the case, and I'll make a video discussing this in the future. I'm also aware that many of you may not even know of this character, as many of you may not have played The Witcher 1. So to briefly explain, Alvin was a child that Geralt met early on in his adventure, who turned out to be magically gifted. except he couldn't control the magic he possessed. You spend most of the game with him just sort of hanging around, and occasionally he just kind of wanders off, until eventually he accidentally teleports himself away during a stressful situation, and then he was just never heard of again. As for Jacques, he is the main antagonist of the game, or at least he is the guy pulling all of the strings. He's the Grand Master of the Order of the Flaming Rose and incredibly magically gifted. It's a lot to get into, but basically it's thought that Alvin teleported backwards in time by accident and eventually became Jacques. There's also a lot of evidence for this, including a certain note that can be found in The Witcher 3, but basically, just so you understand, it's basically outright confirmed that they are the same person. But anyway, for Alvin, many, myself included, when I first started looking into the Witcher lore, were very confused about this character. This is because there seemed to be an almost implication that Alvin, like Ciri, possessed the Elder Blood. However, obviously this wouldn't make much sense in the context of the Witcher universe, considering that the gene generally only re-emerges in female descendants of Lara Dorren, and on top of that, Alvin being descended from Lara is something that isn't even established in the game. The confusion comes from many different reasons, but the main one is Alvin's ability to teleport in a manner similar to Ciri, and on top of this, if he is actually Jacques de Aldersberg, that means he teleported backwards in time, and as we know, Ciri is the Lady of Space and Time. Basically, there are a lot of similarities between Alvin and Ciri that I suppose generally sources wouldn't share. On top of this, Jacques, who is thought to be Alvin, was desperate to save the world from the White Frost, even teleporting us into his mind to show us visions he'd seen that seemed to align with the connection between the Elder Blood and the White Frost. So, to put this confusion to rest, Alvin is simply just a source, not a carrier of the Elder Blood gene. This is what I've personally deduced after reviewing everything. When Alvin teleported away in The Witcher 1, it was during a time of great stress. I believe the Scoia'tael were battling and he was caught in the middle. Perhaps due to this stressful situation, his source powers manifested, and instead of manifesting in the form of blowing up half the town, they manifested by catapulting him backwards in time, perhaps to the town where he was born, for safety. Then, after this, Alvin was able to access magic as his powers had now manifested, and eventually he then went on to become Jacques de Aldersberg, Grand Master of the Order of the Flaming Rose. I hope what I've said today has helped you all with any confusion you have surrounding Alvin, and maybe even Ciri, as I know this topic is similar to the Oriana topic, meaning that the lore was messed around with a bit to get past mistakes to fit into the world. But ultimately, I think the way it's been handled makes sense, at least to me, so I hope this puts some of your minds at rest at least. As always, be sure to like the video to support this sort of content and to see more like it, and if you're new, subscribe. I do Witcher videos every week, so if you subscribe you won't miss them. Be sure to follow my Twitter and Twitch, and as always, a big thanks to the Patreon pledges. You guys are awesome and I really appreciate the support. But anyway, that's it for today's entry guys, and I hope I'll see you all in the next one. Have an awesome rest of the week.